Hey, CBC, thanks so much for joining us this Sunday in worship. Today's going to look a little bit different. Actually, every year for the past few years, this one Sunday looks a little different for us. On the Sunday between Christmas and New Year's, what we like to do is take some time and tell stories about how God has worked in the last year. We like to sit and reflect on how good God has been and then use that as a catalyst for our excitement for the next year. And let me tell you something, 2020 has been one heck of a year. It's been a year that I think now more than ever is worthy of our time and attention to sit down and reflect. And for some people, you've seen God all along, and it's been really good because your kids left the house 5 years ago, and this has really provided you the time to build into your marriage. And for other people, you have toddlers at home, and you need this to end yesterday. I get it. We have varied experiences, and what we know in the middle of the different ways we're processing through what this year has been, that God has been constant, and he's been consistently good. It reminds me of a parable in Matthew 25. It's one of my favorites. It's about a guy that leaves on a long journey, and then he gives his servants money, and he gives one more than the other, and then it kind of walks down the ladder in these three servants. And what I love about this parable, you probably know it. He gives talents, 5 of them, and then 2 of them, and then 1 of them, and he says, hey, I'm going to leave, watch over my money. And it says he went on a long trip, and when he came back after a while, not after a day, not after a week, not after a month, he said he was gone for a long time. And a couple of his servants used the money wisely and grew it over time, and one just buried it in the dirt. And what I love about that parable, and there's a lot of things you could teach from it, is at the end of it, when he's talking to the 2 that used the money wisely, that used what God had given to incrementally grow his influence in their world, monetarily, he looked at him and said, hey, you know what? You have been faithful in some little things. And because you've been faithful in little things, I know that you'll be faithful in bigger things. Here's some bigger things. I think this year is a year when we have to work hard and remember that God has been so faithful in little things, because a lot of our big things were just canceled. A lot of our big things didn't happen like we thought they would and should. And so this year is a time, as we reflect to remember, that we get to look back and say, where has God been at work when the world has shut down? Where has God been at work in the little things? Because what that does, when we remember that God's at work in the little things, that he's consistently good in the chaos of the culture this year, what that does is it reminds us that God will be good in the big things. It reminds us that he's worthy of trusting. It reminds us of a God who's good. And so back at the beginning of this pandemic, we started doing staff videos where we kind of have a panel discussion, because we fundamentally believe that how we grow our faith is we talk to other people who follow Jesus, that share our opinion, that can stretch us and grow us, that add different perspectives, that show us how big our God is, that he's well bigger than just my perspective and my house and my style of living, that God is bigger than all that, so I can trust him. And so today what we've done is we've gathered some staff together, and we've simply asked some questions on how we can see God at work when the world shut down, how we've seen it personally and how we've seen it at CBC, and how we can reflect and know that whether 2021 is different or more of the same of this last year, that God's still good, and that big things are coming, and that we can trust God with those things because he's always good. So check out some of the conversations that we had about how we've seen God at work in our world, in our lives, and in and through CBC throughout this last year. Well, hey guys, thanks for being here today. I remember when we started remember the Zoom call panel discussions at the beginning of the pandemic? Yep. That was in April, but felt like at least 7 years ago, So it's good to do one in person, and I love this service every year. The one in between Christmas and New Year, we take some time to reflect. And we take some time to reflect on the goodness of God and where we've seen it in our church. And I think it's especially needed this year in 2020 and all the things that 2020 has been. So I guess before we really dive into the substance, if I was going to ask you, give me a word, man. Give me a word for 2020 and then tell me why you picked that word. Our word is silence. Anybody have a word for 2020?
Takes us a minute to get going.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I would pick slow or slow-ish. I was thinking about the other day. Kind of reminded me of when the kids were in preschool and younger, where you're like watching the clock, like the minutes going down for Kevin to get home or nap time or bedtime. That just some of those moments felt really slow,
Yeah.
and longer than normal. That's kind of how I would picture this past.
What's that phrase people use? It's like slow days, fast years, something like that.
Right.
You know, with kids and stuff, and
Yes.
slow-ish. Yeah, that's good. What else? What's another word?
I think disjointed.
Yeah.
Everything has been so broken up, especially for me. When we had a baby in the middle of this, and then so you had the beginning of the year, it was normal, and then you have the pandemic hit, and I've got a baby, and I'm trying to figure out how to sleep, and all of the different things that we've heard. Wear masks. Don't wear masks. No, wait. Wear masks. No, wait. I don't. I mean, from that to all of the other policies, everything has said one thing and then another thing and another thing, and so everything gets so mixed up. I'd liken 2020 to a Jackson Pollock painting. It's all just sprayed across the canvas, and you've got all the different pieces that somehow coalesce. Are yet
separate. That's good. Yeah, that's good. Delynn, what about you? Give me a word.
I think it's been like a year to remember. So remembering would be my word. We're empty nesters now.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I can't believe that this is, I feel like I'm like still supposed to have little kids at home or something. How did this happen? Yes, I do actually. But yeah, it's been a year to remember the kids being little, the kids going to college, all the things. It's been a slower year.
Yeah.
For us in a lot of ways. So it's given us a lot of time and space to remember.
I feel like that first year that kids go to college too, when you're just empty nesters, you naturally remember anyway, and you reminisce over, what Christmases were like and Halloweens were like, and you're right now there's just more space for it because we're not going anywhere,
Yeah, and I think too, it's natural to compare, with the pandemic, it was easy to compare. Well, it used to be like this, and that's most of what kind of makes us feel sad or whatever is that comparison. Yeah. So then I think with the college and whatever, that's an upped.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Nick?
Yeah, I think similar to what Andy was saying, disjointed, but the word that comes to my mind is just scattered, where I feel like before I didn't realize how structured my life really was. I think if you'd asked me back in like January, hey, do you feel really your life is really structured? I'd be like, no, not really. It's pretty free. But once everything fell apart, I realized how much I depended on all these different structures that I didn't even realize. And so now everything just felt so scattered, where before everything felt like I really did have a plan for the week, and then it all just sort of fell apart. And I feel like that's even bleeding into now as things are sort of getting back to some version of normal. It still feels like everything is still waiting for some magnificent structure to reappear. But I don't think it's going to.
I don't think we realize how much we're creatures of rhythm and habit.
Yeah.
And even if I can wear sweatpants and I'm working at home and, at noon on a Monday, you don't realize what it is to get up and put pants on. And then how many articles we've read about different rhythms and habits you can have when it feels like you don't have any anymore. Yeah, it really makes us remember how much we are just creatures that like habit and like rhythm and use that to kind of build our day-to-day for sure. Yeah. I think if I was going to choose one, it'd probably be probably unplanned. And it's weird, and I mean that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but when I say unplanned, I mean I've done more planning this year than ever before. We've done more planning at CBC this year than ever before. I don't remember how many versions of the reopening rollout that we had, but it's somewhere in the low teens, I think. We put different phases together, and we knew this was the one, and this whole thing started, I think I told the whole staff, I guarantee you we're back together by Easter. That was about, a month away? I said, there's no way that we're not going to be back together by Easter, and we started meeting again in August. And so it's a year where it's unplanned, but not because, in a way that's good. It's unplanned, and even when you do plan, well, take that off the table and start all over again. So it's really challenged, and I think in some good ways, our perception of the value of planning, which is still immense value in it, but holding those plans just with a straight open palm and saying, we have got to be, I'm a type A personality, we have got to be flexible in our planning, which is not something I strive at. Ask my wife, That kind of gets us into what we're talking about today a little bit, which is we went to the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. And just this idea that culturally, we don't do well at seeing and celebrating the small. We do really well at seeing and celebrating the big moments. We have graduations, we have I'm an empty nester, we have Easter and Christmas on the church side of things. We don't do well at celebrating the small. And so I guess I want to ask you guys, where do you see that? Do you agree with that? And if that's true, what's the cost of that?
Yeah, well, I was, talking about being an empty nester and how we've had time to think about things. And, when you're parents and your lives are just so busy running around, getting to band practice and football games and all the different things, it's easy to forget about your marriage, the relationship. And so this year, it's been something that I've really thought a lot about, actually. And my husband has a stressful job, and I'm very thankful that he goes and does all the things that he does. But, thinking about, at 5 or 6 o'clock, when he's ready to be away from there, is home where he wants to be? Do I celebrate the little things just between he and I enough that he treasures it, and this is his safe place where he wants to be? And so I think there's great value in celebrating the little things.
Yeah.
But the demand of our schedule, kids running here and running there, tends to be the big things.
Mm-hmm.
And we can lose sight of the little things in a hurry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with that.
I think so much of it is a product of dynamics. So there's an idea of separating signal from noise. Even this microphone that we're using, if we're talking louder, it's a whole lot easier to miss the noise that's in the background. But as our voices get smaller and we have to amplify it, you're amplifying the noise along with the signal, and so everything is scattered. Similar to if I'm on stage and I'm looking out, I've got these bright lights, and it's really difficult for me to see the people that are outside. I have to really, really focus to get past the lights. And so in our culture, I think it's a product of how the world works, that so often we see these bigger things, and the bigger lights obscure all of the littler things. And so we have to actively, like I said, focus on those smaller things. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's how it is. But there are very, very wonderful things to be found when we get past those.
I agree. And I'd say even, because life is faster now than it ever has been before on so many different levels, whether it's information coming at us or just how we move and travel and schedules, I think that it's harder to see the small things in a faster lifestyle. So it's easier to focus on just the really big things because, A, it seems like there's more of them because now I get to see everybody else's really big things. So it minimizes my small thing, and it conditions us to look for big things in our own life as well. And all that does, and you said, like you said, there's not anything wrong with that per se, but it causes us not to value those little things or even see them in some levels. Like you were talking about of just focusing on your marriage. I know we've had conversations about now that you don't have to feed kids in the house, like your favorite meal is cereal. Right? And
True.
And you celebrate it. You eat like every night. You and Mark just have cereal, and how much you love cereal. That's a small win for you guys. Yeah.
Not having to cook.
Yeah, I think as a culture too, it's instant gratification.
Yeah.
So just with all the technology and everything, I can get everything at a click of a button. I won't even tell you how late I started Christmas shopping because it would stress some people out on watching this. And so I think that also, that tension, so when we were all forced to be at home or forced to kind of stay in this bubble or whatever, you could stream some of that kind of stuff, but all the rest of it, like the trip that you looked forward for spring break or the things that you naturally held out for, you couldn't count on those.
Right.
And in fact, eventually you kind of stopped planning them because, there was just going to be, it was almost too frustrating to keep rescheduling them.
Yep.
And so I find it interesting. I'm a bit of a nerd, and so I'm always looking for like the perfect planner. And what I've noticed is some of the planners that get like the best, one thing that they all have in common is that at night they'll have you review your day and find the good things, like find 3 good things. And I think that they really want you to go to sleep thinking about the good, right? And I've just noticed that some of the best ones behind science and research, that's a common thread. And so I think COVID, I'm a planner, I look forward. It's forced me to find the good in the moment. And
not look for like the next big moment that's going to come.
Right.
It's even taking away like weekends. Weekends you can unplug and hang out with friends and go to movies. My
weekend
wife
feels just like the weekday.
It feels just like the weekday, and you can't get away from the kids. And so it really is. Yeah, it's finding like, okay, so what's there to celebrate on a Monday? Not saying what's to celebrate on a Monday is I'm closer to Friday.
Right.
Yeah, that's really good.
Right.
I like that. Yeah. Nick, how do you feel like it changes how we see the big and small?
I was just thinking about this thing that happened to us recently. So I think everybody has kind of basically said this, that like big victories are easy to celebrate, small victories are harder to find because we don't naturally celebrate them. So like my oldest daughter, she just found out that she gets to go on to point shoes in ballet.
Yeah.
Which when I heard it, I was like, okay, great. I got to buy something else. That's fine. But for her, it was this huge deal. I don't think I realized how big a deal it was for her, and my wife very wisely made it a big deal. Like if it was up to me, I would have been like, oh yeah, Kate, I guess we got to get you some point shoes. So go get ready for bed, and we'll talk about that later. For her, it was like, let's make it into a celebration. Like she showed her the email, and she read it. She was crying and very excited, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a huge deal for her. And it was so cool to see how my wife knew that this needed to be celebrated, and she did. And I don't know, it was just fun to see that happen. Like what I thought was just a small thing, I watched it become a big thing, and it just filled her with so much joy and excitement. It was amazing.
I think ultimately, too, what happens when we start to be a people in a culture and Christ followers who start seeing and celebrating the small victories along the way and not forgetting the big ones is it builds up confidence in God, right? And so this whole thing today is about how God was still working when the world seemingly shut down, and how, sure, I think as a church, we play into that mindset in some capacities, celebrating the big, right? Because our church calendar is celebrated around new fall launch. It's celebrated around Christmas and Easter, which I always call the Christian Super Bowl. This idea that we have these big moments that we build momentum off of, and that's really good. But this year has forced us to say, wait, God is just as good on the Monday after Easter that he is on the Sunday of Easter when everything's going on, And it's forced us to stop and say, where are those moments? Because what that does is it's a healthier relationship. If you only celebrate your marriage one day a year on your anniversary, you have a less healthy relationship than if you celebrate all the days in little ways. Like you said, do we want to make this an environment that is healthy, that we want to come home to, that's encouraging, that's active, that's a catalyst for joy? And I think it's what this year has really challenged us to do. And so we're going to talk about CBC in just a sec, but before we get there, I want to go personal a little bit with all of us. So if I was going to ask you, and I am, where have you seen God be faithful? Where have you seen small wins? Where have you seen God work just in your life, your family, with your wife and husband and kids? Where have you seen that in the year of COVID? What's that look like for you?
We've had lots of extra opportunities. So I mentioned I had a son at the beginning of the time, and then as people were locking down.
And just real quick, you talk about the big wins. You prayed for that son we all prayed for that son for years, so that was like huge.
Huge. The day he was born, I got a text message from my sister. They celebrate. They have a prayer request whiteboard, and they put them on there, and then they check them off, and they thank God every time. And
that's cool.
I got a text message. I've got to keep it together, but they said today we celebrated the answer of a prayer of over 7 years.
Yeah.
And that was something really, really worthwhile. But in all of that, I would have had to go back to work and missed a lot of extra time. That working from home, I got to make breakfast for my son. I got to change a couple of extra diapers. We got to see just in that, as the world slowed down, where we got to spend a good bit more time that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten to watch my son change so very rapidly from day to day to day to day. Yeah.
That's big. I think Delinda would say, soak in those moments, because
for sure
you blink and they're in college.
I remember our first Sunday back, and we didn't have childcare, and some kid cried.
Yeah.
And y'all were all like, oh, and I was just like, oh.
Like your heart broke.
I love every moment of that.
Yeah. What about you? So the small moments in your personal life, have you seen God show up?
Yeah, this has been a very interesting year. I started last year a program at Friends University, a certificate program in Christian spiritual formation. And it was really a great program. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I was loving it. But COVID killed my program, and they totally disbanded my group and did away with the program. And so I'm sad about that. But before all of that happened, one of the last things that they had us do is they were introducing us to things that they assumed that we weren't familiar with. And indeed, I didn't grow up in a liturgical church, and so I didn't have a lot of liturgical practices in my daily
we call them responsive
worship.
readings, right? Like those kind of things, the rhythms and stuff?
Yeah, this was like a printed sheet that was a prayer.
Gotcha.
And it was pretty long. It took me like 11 minutes a day to read it. And so, at any rate, they asked us to make the habit of praying this written prayer for 40 days. And like on day 3, don't decide that you don't like it. Mm-hmm. And that this is dumb, that these are not my words, this is not my heart. Just stick with it and do it. Like, this is training you to pray better. And so they wisely told us that we expect you to commit to this for 40 days. And what I learned about that through that process was how often we are quick to make judgments about what God is doing and whether we like something or not.
And if it's good.
Right.
Right.
Instead of, with perseverance, pressing through to learning new things. And I did learn a lot about that. I started thinking far more Trinitarian, actually, just in my day-to-day habits because of these prayers. So it changed a lot. And so I've been thankful for the time and the space this year to learn new things, think things differently, develop new practices and habits. It's been that part of this year has been very good.
That's great. That's really good. Yeah.
I was thinking about, so I'm a year behind Lynn in that my oldest is a senior in high school here at Marcus, and he's been working for years thinking of what Nick was talking about for basketball. I mean, just diligently working on it. And last summer was supposed to be his big recruiting. We had all these big trips planned and camps and to get seen. And luckily, actually, in Texas, we got to play more basketball than most of the country, but it did not go anywhere. And I think we can all kind of relate to that, right? Like, we maybe had some big expectations, something that had been something we had planned on for years. And God has been so faithful. Like, I don't just say that. He has been so faithful. He still has great opportunities to go play basketball. And but what's interesting is in all that change, my big win, I think, as a family would be I have a 15-year-old daughter and then the almost 18-year-old and son, and they've always just kind of run parallel, not necessarily like negative, but never like this BFF kind of situation. And especially in middle school and high school, they were both so busy with different interests. And so COVID being locked down together, and then now they're doing virtual plus, the laughing, the memes, the time they've spent together, that relationship, and that's going to last a lot longer than basketball at the end of the day. And so that's something I wouldn't have even known to pray for, but that relationship is a lot stronger.
It's just crazy. They could look back and be like, hey, this was the year that really we laid a foundation for an adult relationship.
Yes,
you know,
right? And that we wouldn't have gotten that time.
Where we learned, like, we didn't like each other because we're supposed to, because we're family. We like each other because we're family and we like each other. And that's a unique perspective that family brings, is just simply that other people don't understand, like, all that we've gone through together. And so,
that takes time. That takes time over time, right?
Over time,
and they wouldn't have had it.
That's really cool.
You know.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, so thinking about what you're saying with my kids, it's almost been a little bit different where, you know, we're always, because we homeschool, so we're home together a lot. But we're also
so you chose COVID before COVID. Yeah, you're like, let's just not leave.
So, you know, but we also, with homeschooling, we're also involved in a lot of groups. So we're always out doing things. And when that got taken away from us, you know, we really did all of a sudden realize, well, this is it. It's just us hanging out all the time, all day. And it caused a lot of conflict, you know, like my oldest daughter, my youngest, my son, they get along pretty well. They can play all day. But then when my middle child, Harper, she gets involved, she's always wanting to orchestrate and choreograph what's happening. And so there's just a lot of conflict between them. And I know, they don't know this, but I know that conflict breeds better relationships over time. And so that this is an important time where sometimes I will let them I'll let them fight it out. Yeah. I'll let them argue. And my wife is there like, I have to do something. I'm like, no, just wait. Just let them talk it through. And it's getting better. Yeah. You know, like, they're getting better at conflict. They're getting better at learning how to explain what they're feeling. And, you know, that wouldn't have happened without this. And so even though it's a difficult season, it's a season that's going to grow into a better relationship.
Have you read, I'm thinking about, have you ever read Don Miller's book, A Million Miles in 1,000 Years? Yeah. Yeah, so the whole thing is he was asked to write a screenplay of his life, and he started, and he realized his life is really boring. Because I think he says in the book, nobody wants to watch a movie about, like, a 30-year-old that has a minivan. Like, that's just not going to, like, grip you or bring you right into the plot line. And so he talks about how he needed to do things to make his life more interesting, and so he does all these adventures. And basically what it came down to was conflict we're drawn to, because conflict is where growth happens. And I think the Bible speaks that in James 1, right? When it says, hey, consider all these trials as a good thing because of what God is doing through the trials in the first place. And I think it comes down to what we talked about is we just don't have, because we're an instant culture that likes big wins and sometimes easy wins, we don't have the perspective and the patience and the perseverance to celebrate it because we're not willing to look back and be like, hey, I know God's going to do really good things here because he's done really great things in all the small things leading up to this in the next, 2, 5, and 10 months, days, weeks, years. And that mentality, I think, is really cool. Yeah, I love that. I'd say, for me and Sarah and the kid, it's been tough. It's just been tough to work from home with toddlers, and there's been a lot of emotions and crying and yelling and then sometimes Eleanor will do it. But I think I think that with that, one thing I really valued, Sarah and I thought for years, even when we first got married, we were like, we're going to live in New York. Like, we're going to move to New York City because we're those kind of people. We're independent. We're slightly hipsterish. We are going to be those people. And I think our families moved around a lot, and so they didn't have family near them. And I think we'd both say one of the biggest wins has just been recognizing the value that having both our families close by is to us. It's huge. Like, we couldn't get through it without them. And I think I knew that before, and I always thought it was maybe a weakness because I needed somebody else. That's my pride, stepping up and through. And now I see it as a complete blessing, and man, I wouldn't change it. It's the coolest. So I love that. I think that it's changed and maybe cemented my perspective on how God has blessed our family through having family near that I didn't see before. And yeah, so it's been hard, but it's been good because of that. Let's pivot to CBC a little bit. So same thing. We see the faithfulness of God in little ways in our personal life, but let's talk about our church. Where have we seen the little wins? Because we shut down. We didn't have Easter this year like we normally did. We didn't go to any summer mission trips. We didn't have kids camp in the summer. We didn't have camp in the city in the summer. Our fall launch was really kind of like a fall, right? I mean, because most groups met in online forums, and we have a few groups meeting here, and it's picked up, and it's built, and it's been good. But how have we seen in the middle of all that, as we shut down Sunday morning churches for 5 months, how have we seen God show up in little ways at CBC? What's he been doing?
I was thinking about a time, it was before Easter, when things had just changed so drastically, but we were making bags because everything had kind of pivoted to mobile, and we had families coming and picking up, and Trisha stepped up, and Judith, and we were so busy, and but there were no kids in the building, and we just kept wrestling with how many weeks it had been. And Joe Cross and his whole team was up here, and they had teenagers volunteering, and it was just like this well-oiled machine because Love Packs had just stepped into now this every week need for kids that were now home that were food unstable. And I remember God just saying, like, hey, kids are still being served. And it was just a really big moment, just thinking of, and the teenagers that were helping and other adults from our church.
And just seeing how God used literally our empty rooms to fill them with things that would meet the community's needs.
They overflowed. They usually kind of have one kind of smaller area, and they had overflowed into several rooms. And I mean, it was just a whole thing.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of spots where the workload has ballooned for some of us, and some people have had a little bit less, but there's a lot of additional things that we've had to learn on the fly, and a lot of people that... Like
technology?
Yeah. So, I mean, think about this. If you're watching this right now, Stephanie has poured her heart and soul into all of these videos.
We didn't broadcast online before COVID. Like we had like a year roll-up plan, and we had to do what we were going to do in about a year, in about 2 weeks.
Absolutely. The number of hours we put in just in Easter alone, she should have quit.
I thought she was going to, if I'm honest.
Yeah, but I mean... all of the work that she's put in.
It's been amazing.
People like Doug and Bruce have put in. I mean, Bruce is up here. He's a volunteer, and you see him all the time. There are just people behind the scenes that have really stepped up into needs that have been here, and I think it's a blessing to see them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tag off that, and mine is definitely just going to be the staff here. And there's been a lot of things that I've seen. I might throw in one or two more, but it's really amazing to watch a church staff, because I've been in unhealthy church staffs, and I've been in a healthy church staff situation, and in other jobs and fields too, and it's the same. And when people are dedicated to what you're doing and not what they're doing, usually they'll say, hey, what do you need done, and let's go. And so sure, maybe it's outside of what I was hired for and my responsibilities, but I've seen here, we've asked people to do things that are well outside of what we hired them for because we need it done. Anywhere from like, I needed to learn this new skill set to let's stack some chairs today because it's what we have to do, And it's been really amazing. It's been really encouraging just to watch people say, what do we need done? And let's get it done, because what we're doing is more important than who we are individually. And in the call of this church to show people that God has not gone absent when the world shut down a little bit has been so big and huge. And I'm really appreciative just for, volunteers and staff and our elder board. It's been really encouraging. it's been a body blow to most organizations. It's been a body blow to a lot of churches. And so I'm appreciative for this one. And I've definitely seen the faithfulness of God in that as he's built this staff in this place for years. This isn't a product of a couple months. This is a product of years of pursuing Christ together. Yeah, for sure.
Student stuff has been really interesting because it's funny. I feel like what I have now is in a very strange, backward sort of way what I've always prayed for in student ministry. When the shutdown came and we had to go online and we were trying to make connections through all the digital space, it was difficult. And then when we came back, what we got back were the kids that were really committed, that really want to see themselves grow and grow closer to Christ. And whereas before, I feel like we'd have bigger groups, but half of them were only there every once in a while and things like that. And now the group that comes every week is the same group, and they're committed and they know each other and they care about each other. And I'm watching this very small, group start to actually grow closer to Christ. I'm getting to see it happen in real time. Whereas before, it's harder to see because it's a bigger group, but with the smaller, more concentrated group of students, it is just like so visible and so obvious that these kids are growing and growing closer together, desiring closeness with Christ. And it's just so weird that this is not specifically what I would have prayed for, but this is how God has answered my prayer over the years. For a committed group that wants to grow closer to Christ. He's given me that, and we're moving forward, and it's been really interesting.
I couldn't even, I had student ministry for a little while, and I just couldn't even imagine how cool it would be to see, kind of like what Andy said, you see little growths along the way, and again, to walk with students and say, let's celebrate that. Like that's a really good thing. It's interesting.
Well, and as a mom, Riley, we're talking about this, she's gotten very plugged in this year. We've been here all of last year, and she came, but different when there's that same group coming, right, and doing life together with Rachel and Cindy, and it's made a big difference kind of as a mom. And seeing that a little bit on Sundays too, like parents stepping up to help serve and kind of getting some ownership and walking the halls and seeing them sitting at tables with kids and getting to know other people's kids and loving on them as if they were their kids, and joking with each other and just kind of having that common. It's been pretty amazing.
That's
as well
awesome.
As some of our volunteers still showing up weekly or every other week, even though there's only one service. I mean, there's been some pretty amazing
That's really cool.
things.
Yeah.
Well, I think I felt a lot of tension this year, because we've dealt with a fair amount of people wanting groups to form and to be what they were non-pandemic life, right? And us not being able to meet that expectation.
Yeah.
And, having to learn this whole new virtual thing and in person and virtual. And we've been able to have groups, less groups than what we normally have.
Yeah.
But I think the value, like you were saying, Nick, of the groups has blown me away. Right. Unbelievable. Like the groups, just for me, I mean, I know a few other groups too, but the groups that I participate in, I have seen more intimacy, more honesty, more, gut level dealing with people's stuff before the Lord and with trusted friends. I mean, it's been unparalleled. Absolutely. I've never seen people bring such honesty to the table before. So while it's been frustrating on some hands, on one hand where people are disgruntled, and on the other hand, just deep transformation happening at the same time. So, yeah.
Yeah, we talk about it often, but just the idea that we live in tension, and the world isn't as black and white as we think it is. It's not as easy as we think it is, or we tell afterwards that it is. We're going to tell the story of 2020 for a long time, and the farther away we get from it, the less we'll remember the tension of it. But, well, this happened, and instead, ask me now, it's like there's so many feels. We can be happy and sad at the exact same time, and so you get that a little bit in 2020. And that's what it means to remember the small wins. Is in the middle of this conversation, I don't want to do 2020 again. I don't. I want to say goodbye to it. I don't want to go through another year like this with all the chaos and with all the, just everything, the baggage that came with all of what this year has brought. But at the same time, I want to say, hey, I can see the good in the middle of it because I know that God is good and he's in the middle of it. And it's that theme that we're talking about this year. It's that theme that I think we have been forced to see. And it's that lesson that I don't want to forget going forward. That whether next year is really good and a rebounds or a continuation of this year, that the goodness of God doesn't change. And I think it's a discipline to see that. I think it's a discipline to remember that and a discipline to celebrate that. And so I think that's what today is all about, is reminding people to buy into that discipline. Yeah. And I love what you said, to sit down and say, hey, what's 3 good things that happened today? What's 3 good things that happened today? What's 3 good things that happened this year? And just to remember with our families or just by ourselves, because God is good all the time. And in this year, we see him be really good in the small things. And that gives us confidence, like the parable said, that he's going to be good in the big things too. And I love that. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, I want to take a minute and just get a little cheesy with everybody. I don't know, cheesy, hokey, whatever you want to call it. But one of the things I did want to do at the end of this video is, it's been a heck of a year. And the one thing I'm really appreciative for, amongst all the other things that was said, when you lead a group of people, you can never make everybody happy. And so no matter what happens, people are going to be happy and mad and sad and glad at all your decisions. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited for our church because, through all this, I want to be a church. We all want to be a church that doesn't just talk about grace, but lives it well. It's a message that personally we've come back to as a staff, and we've talked about how God brought us here only through the lens of grace and not other things. And we didn't hire search firms to find us. It's how God has brought us together and how we care for people and how we have a heart and a passion for people that have been hurt by churches, because we want to be a place of healing and grace for people to find Jesus again. And I think it's a really cool idea, and it's something that we all need. And what this last year has done is it's convinced me more than ever that we are a church of grace. Sure, there have been some people that have been mad at some things we've done, but overwhelmingly, I get texts and I get emails and I get calls, and people are saying, hey, thank you so much for everything we're doing. We're praying for CBC. We're praying for how we can be used. How do you need help? Where do you need help? I get that all the time. And so I just want you guys to know that it has been a difficult but really encouraging year, because I think what crisis does is it shows our character. And I'm really happy with the character I've seen at CBC. I'm really happy with some of the Christ-likeness I've seen in our staff, like we talked about, and our volunteers, and our people who follow Jesus together. So I'm remembering that. I'm celebrating that, and I'm really excited to go into 2021. Hopefully way different than 2020. But I'm glad the group of people God put us around to follow Jesus together. So part of this just me saying thanks to you guys and thanks to all of our people. I really appreciate you guys. And I think I can also say we just love you. And we're looking forward to what God's going to keep doing as we get into January and talk about solitude and silence a little bit coming after 2021, and then get into the Gospel of Matthew a little bit. So thanks for your time, guys. I really appreciate it. Yeah, good chat. We'll see everybody in 2021. I love hearing the stories of how God's been at work in our lives and in our church community. Because sometimes I miss it. I'm not in Kidsmen all the time, or I'm not in student ministry or in Andy's neck of the woods. And so sometimes I need to sit down with people and just say, tell me how you've seen it. Tell me how you've seen God be consistently good in the small things. So I hope that conversation was good for you. I hope that it challenges you a little bit and asks us all to ask good questions about where we've seen the faithfulness of God. So obviously we're at our homes on the 27th, and next week we'll meet back in person at 10 a.m. But before we go, at the end of this, there's a song that we love. I think Andy and I were talking about it a couple weeks ago. It's called The Story I'll Tell, and it just talks about God's goodness and how we get to tell that story each and every day. And what happens in the middle of what we've been going through is when people see the consistency of our God this year, that makes God more beautiful. That makes people recognize and realize that he's worth worshiping. And so we, with all of our lives, get to tell the story of God who's always good when things around us don't seem as good as they used to be. And so I pray that as you listen to this song, as you worship with Rachel and Andy, that you start to ask yourselves the same questions. It's your turn to say, where have I seen God be good in the small things this year? To write down 3 or 4, either by yourself or with your family, and trust that a God who's faithful in small things will also be faithful in big things. Because 2021 is going to be a great year for us. It's going to be a good year because God is good, but it's going to be a good year because he's going to keep growing us as a people. In January, we get into spiritual disciplines, and we're going to talk about the value of solitude and silence. And I realized we probably should have done that last year, but I didn't know 2020 was coming. And then we're going to talk about the Gospel of Matthew for about 9 weeks before Easter, and it's going to be worth celebrating. So thanks for joining us today. Thanks for being part of a group of people that follow Jesus. Thanks for celebrating a consistently good God with us. And I pray that this has blessed you today, and I can't wait to see you next week in 2021.
The hour is dark, and it's hard to see what you are doing here in the ruins and where this will lead. Oh, but I know that down through the years I'll look on this moment, see your hand on it, and know you were here. And I'll testify of the battles you've won. You were my portion when there wasn't enough. And I'll testify of the seas that we've crossed, the waters you parted, the waves that I've walked. Oh, my God did not fail. Oh, it's a story I'll tell. Oh, I know it is well. Oh, it's a story I'll tell.
Options are few, and I can't see what you're doing. I know that you're proving you're the God who comes through. And oh, that I know that over the years I'll look back on this moment, see your hand on it, know you were here, and I'll testify of the battles we've won. You were my portion when there wasn't enough, and I'll testify of the seas that we've crossed, the waters you parted,
testify of the battles you won. You were my portion when there wasn't enough. And I'll testify of the seas that we crossed, the waters you parted, the waves that I walked.